April 26, 1986. Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant explodes. In our timeline, the disaster was horrific but contained. 3 brave men drained the water pools beneath the reactor before the molten core could reach them. But what if they had failed? What if the core hit the water, triggering a second explosion estimated at 2 to 4 megatons, destroying all 4 reactors at once? The fallout would not have contaminated a city. It would have erased 3 countries from the map. This is the story of the exclusion zone, the size of Western Europe. In reality, the Chernobyl disaster released about 400 times the radiation of Hiroshima. But engineers feared something far worse. Beneath Reactor 4 sat 2 enormous pools of water, used to cool the emergency systems. When the molten nuclear fuel, called corium, began melting through the concrete floor, it was heading straight for that water. If it had reached it, the resulting steam explosion would have been powerful enough to destroy reactors 1, 2, and 3 as well. The combined release of radioactive material would have been 50 to 100 times worse than what actually happened. In our timeline, 3 men volunteered to wade into radioactive water and open the drainage valves. They succeeded. In this timeline, they do not make it in time. The second explosion occurs on May 1, 1986. The blast destroys the entire Chernobyl complex. A radioactive plume 50 times larger than the original disaster rises into the atmosphere. The wind patterns of late April carry it northwest across Belarus, west across northern Ukraine, and southwest toward Moldova. Within 72 hours, radiation levels across an area the size of France exceed safe limits for human habitation. Not for months, not for years, for centuries. The Soviet government, which spent the first 3 days denying anything had happened, now faces the largest forced evacuation in human history. 65 million people live in the contaminated zone. Ukraine alone has 51 million. Belarus has 10 million. Moldova has 4 million. The Soviet military begins forced evacuations within a week. But moving 65 million people is not an operation. It is a second disaster. Trains run 24 hours a day heading east into Russia. Refugee camps spring up in Volgograd, Saratov, and across Central Asia. Families are separated. Livestock is abandoned. By the end of 1986, the largest refugee crisis in recorded history is underway, and it is entirely inside one country's borders. Ukraine was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union. Its black soil, the famous Chernozem, produced a quarter of all Soviet grain. That soil is now poisoned with cesium-137 and strontium-90. The 1986 harvest is abandoned. The 1987 harvest does not exist. The Soviet Union, already struggling to feed its population, faces a grain crisis unlike anything since the famines of the 1930s. Moscow is forced to buy wheat from the United States and Canada, spending hard currency reserves it cannot afford to lose. Rationing returns to Soviet cities for the first time since World War II. In our timeline, Chernobyl helped bring down the Soviet Union over 5 years. In this timeline, it brings it down in 2. The cost of relocating 65 million people, combined with the loss of Ukrainian industry and agriculture, bankrupts Moscow by 1988. Glasnost does not come gradually. It erupts. Soviet citizens, watching their government lie about radiation levels while their children develop cancer, lose all remaining faith in the Communist Party. Gorbachev is overthrown in a coup, not in 1991, but in 1988. The Soviet Union does not dissolve peacefully. It fractures violently. Where do 65 million Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Moldovans go? Russia absorbs the largest share, roughly 30 million, settling them in Siberia, the Urals, and the Russian Far East. But Russia does not want them all. Ethnic tensions explode. Ukrainians who had lived in Kyiv for generations are now refugees in Novosibirsk, competing with locals for apartments and jobs. A Ukrainian diaspora of unprecedented scale forms across the former Soviet Union and eventually the world. By the year 2000, Ukrainian exile communities exist in every major Western city. They carry their culture, their language, and their grief with them. By the year 2000, the exclusion zone has been sealed for 14 years. Kiev, once home to 2.5 million people, is a ghost city. Trees grow through the windows of the Kreshtadik, the grand boulevard in the city center. Wolves and wild boar roam the halls of the Verkhovna Rada, the former Ukrainian parliament. Minsk is the same. Chisinau is the same. 3 capital cities abandoned to nature. The zone is monitored by satellite and patrolled by robotic drones by the 2010s, but no human being is permitted to enter for longer than 48 hours. It is the largest nature preserve on the planet and the most dangerous. The map of Europe changes permanently. Poland now borders the exclusion zone directly. Romania and Hungary share a border with a radioactive wasteland. NATO's eastern frontier is no longer a political boundary but a physical one. No army can cross the zone. No pipeline can be built through it. Russia loses its land connection to Europe west of the zone. Kaliningrad becomes an island surrounded by NATO territory on one side and the zone on the other. The geopolitical chessboard of the 21st century is completely rearranged. There is no Crimea crisis in 2014. There is no invasion of Ukraine in 2022. There cannot be, because there is no Ukraine to invade. The country that would have become independent in 1991 simply does not exist as a state in this timeline. Its people are scattered across the world. Its territory is a dead zone. Russia never becomes the aggressive revisionist power it became in our timeline, because the exclusion zone acts as a permanent buffer. There is no NATO expansion debate, because the zone makes the question irrelevant. The hundreds of thousands of soldiers who died in the war in our timeline are alive somewhere else, living different lives. The global reaction to a Chernobyl disaster 50 times worse than reality is absolute. Nuclear power is not debated. It is banned. Country after country shuts down its reactors through the 1990s. By the year 2000, only France still operates nuclear plants, and even France begins decommissioning by 2010. The world turns to coal, oil, and natural gas instead. Renewable energy receives less investment because fossil fuels are cheaper and available now. By 2026, global carbon emissions are 30% higher than in our timeline. The climate crisis arrives faster and hits harder. The irony is devastating. The worst nuclear disaster in history accelerates the worst environmental crisis in history. 40 years after the disaster, the zone is one of the most studied places on Earth. Scientists enter in radiation suits for brief expeditions to track the wildlife that has taken over. The Chernobyl exclusion zone in our timeline is already home to wolves, lynx, bison, and over 200 bird species. In this timeline, the zone is 200 times larger. It is the largest unintentional rewilding project in history. Przewalski's horses, European bison, and brown bears thrive in the ruins of Kyiv. The rivers run clear. The forests are thick. Nature did not need 3 countries. It just needed humans to leave. So which world do you choose? A world where 65 million people lost everything, where 3 nations became a wasteland, where climate change accelerated by decades? Or our world, where those countries survived but now face a different kind of destruction? A war that has killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions by conventional means. Chernobyl teaches us that the line between a contained disaster and a civilizational one is thinner than we want to believe. 3 men in a flooded basement saved 3 countries. Sometimes, everything depends on who shows up. In our timeline, the new safe confinement, a 36,000-ton steel arch, was built over Reactor 4 in 2016. It is designed to last 100 years. The land around it will be radioactive for 20,000. In this alternate timeline, there is no arch. There is no containment. There is just a vast, beautiful, poisoned wilderness where 3 countries used to be, and 65 million stories scattered across the world like fallout. If this made you think, hit subscribe. The next divergent past is already loading.